Hello again, everyone, and thanks for joining us for another particular live webinar. My name is Adam Wright. Today, I'm joined by NServiceBus champ and CEO of Kaizen IO, Kijana Woodard, who will answer the question, is the customer always right? Just a quick note before we begin, please use the Q&A feature to ask any questions you may have during today's live webinar, and we'll be sure to address them at the end of the presentation. We'll follow up offline to answer any questions we are unable to get to during this live webinar. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and everyone will receive a link to the recording via email. Okay, without further ado, welcome Kijana.
Thank you, Adam. All right. Today we're here to talk about, is the customer always right? So first up, a little bit about me. My name is Kijana Woodard. I go by my first and last name on X and LinkedIn. I have been a professional programmer since the mid to late 90s. Kind of started off VB4, 5, 6, and then got into .NET right at 1.0. So since the beginning, I think I still might have some apps kind of built in .NET 1 or 2 out there. I've worked in every kind of organization, company imaginable, from the largest Fortune 500s all the way down to, very small startups. In terms of technology, I've done the traditional in-tier development, SQL Server, relational database that everybody in .NET has done. I've used WinForms, Web Forms, WCF, and then right around 2010, when I started consulting, I learned about NServiceBus and started doing messaging, and then started just exploring that whole space with messaging, event sourcing, document databases, DDD, CQRS, all the things. Like I said, I've been consulting since 2010. Again, working for a wide variety of organizations, and now I run Kaizen IO, and we help mid-market business owners unblock operational bottlenecks in order to maximize their business performance. So today, what I want to cover is, when is the customer wrong? How can we break apart our systems and kind of make a distributed system? What problems emerge from breaking things apart? And then how do we tie everything back together? So is the customer always right? And the emphasis is on the word the, because we tend to build systems where there's a single concept, a single model of a customer. And I think that becomes problematic, but you hear it all the time. It's like you're dealing with microservices and people say, oh, we built the customer service, talk to the product service, the order service. And then even at the database level, you'll say, what's the customer status or the product description or the order status? And these things, I think they're very natural that this is the way people think, but it causes problems. I was working on a project one time. There was, it was kind of the setup was that they sold products along with some other services on a website. And there was a customer facing website, and then there was a back end sort of operational website. And when we started, it was like, well, we'll just have copies of the products in both places. And the reaction is, well, we need a single source of truth. That's something you hear all the time. We need a single source of truth for our product information. Like, oh, okay, well, fine. And so like, okay, what do we got here? We got a SKU, we got a description, we got a price. Okay, fine. So you set that up and you say, well, here you go. And then when you look at it, it's like, well, the description that we have is really kind of long-winded and it's for customers, but the people that are doing pick and pack in the warehouse, that's like too much information, and they're really used to just kind of looking at a much shorter description to find and pick and pack the products. And you go, oh, okay, well, we'll make a kind of a short description for that pick and pack procedure. And it's like, well, there's also customer service reps, and they don't know the products to the level of the pick and pack people, but they also don't need this long-winded description that the customers see. And you go, okay, well, we'll add another column. So, okay, are we good? And then well, some of our SKUs aren't really orderable by the customers. We don't want them to be able to order that. They just can, they get ordered by customer service on behalf of them for certain special situations. We don't want to show all those products to the customers. Like, okay, so we need some flag of whether it's available. And as you kind of keep going through the scenarios, it just gets more and more complex to put all this information in this single source of truth. And then the other thing that kind of comes out of it is like when you take a step back, it's like, is there really even are we getting any value by having it in one spot? Because, well, we only show this description over here, we only show this description over there, we only show these products over here, we show those products over there. And sure, there are some that are duplicated, but really the overlap is just the SKU. And it's like, how much duplication is there really? Just this SKU? Well, that's not much of a problem. Further, like if you're trying to go in and add a product to the system, you have to now take into account every possible scenario in the company and fill out the data appropriately just to add a product. And if you just wanted to add something quickly for the back office team to put in, you have to kind of go around the company and ask everybody like, well, is there ever a situation where I need to enable this feature for these other scenarios? And it just becomes really complicated. And at the end of the day, like I said, what problem did you actually solve? There was hardly any real duplication, but it's so tempting to sort of mentally put everything in one bucket and say, we have a single source of truth for products. So I wanted to explore this idea of, how customer, if you want to build a customer table or a customer service, like how that typically gets shaped out. And so I decided to, do what we do nowadays. And I asked LLMs to, give me a design for a customer for like an e-commerce site. And so ChatGPT gave me this output, and it says, okay, yeah, you got your first name and last name and email, and there's a password. Okay. And, then I see down here at the bottom, it kind of adds like, oh, a newsletter subscribed, and you get a Boolean, like, okay, well, I guess you have one newsletter. Loyalty points, and you get an integer. Well, I hopefully there's no decimal values. It's not actual dollars. It's just integer. You get an account status, which has some examples, but it's a varchar 20, so it could kind of be anything. So, okay. But you kind of see where you get the beginning of like a lot of concerns sort of mixed into this table. I asked Grok the same question, and it came back with a slightly different answer. A lot of the same stuff with first name, obviously, first name, last name, loyalty points, but he also threw in like total orders and total spent, which is an interesting thing because the rest of this is sort of like CRUD data. But total orders is like, well, this is a calculated field from somewhere. So there must be some process that's keeping that up to date. And how would you validate that it's right? This is an interesting thing, but it's just kind of putting everything together in this one table. Like, all right, that's an interesting idea. And then Claude just said, like, I'm not going to do this single table thing. You're going to get multiple tables, and I'm going to support multiple addresses, and customer loyalty, and is going to be separate, separate preferences thing. So Claude got really adventurous and did a kind of a robust design for this. But, again, it's sort of putting all of the concerns sort of close together into one bucket. And so, like if we kind of look at those examples, I think they're pretty typical. I also did some searches on Google and saw a lot of people's designs, and it's all very similar things. If you're anything like me, when you look at a design like that, you kind of look at it and you start picking it apart. And I think the way you pick it apart is you sort of imagine scenarios and say like, well, what if we want to do this? And what if we want to do that? And then you sort of look for whether the model that you've established can support it, and then either criticize it because it can't support it, like, oh, you can't handle multiple addresses or something, or you want to adjust the model. But I don't think ultimately that's a great approach, because really architecture and design are only relevant in whatever context that they're created in. And I think it's really easy to sort of look at a design and sort of criticize it based on almost imaginary requirements and saying, well, it's not flexible, it's not this or that. But it's really hard to know what are the true constraints in the abstract for some software, right? So like, what is the time constraints? What's the budget constraints? What are the users' needs? You need a context, and that's true for building physical buildings, and it's also true for software. So one thing I want to kind of get across is, I think we make a mistake as developers, architects, when we're trying to chase the perfect design. There's that word "the" again, where it's like there is one right way to do things, and one right approach. Um, you know, George Box has this great quote that I use a lot, which is "All models are wrong, but some are useful." And for me, that's great because it sort of lets you off the hook in the sense of, hey, we're trying to model the real world here, and whatever model we come up with is wrong. Like, it is not a perfect replica of the real world by definition. And so you can kind of let yourself off the hook to some degree and go like, hey, I'm not trying to build the right thing. I want to build something useful, right? And like, something that makes me cringe is you hear a lot on projects is like, whether it's a rewrite or a brand new project, the kind of goal is like, we just need to design this right the first time. And there's so much presumption to that statement. The idea that you're going to figure everything out about a project and get it all right before you even start, get all the requirements down and get them correct. It's so hard to do. I don't know that I've ever seen anybody even come close to accomplishing it. And at the same time, you waste a lot of time not getting feedback. If you like, even if you could somehow manage to get all the current requirements down, for sure you don't have the future requirements. You don't know how things are going to change in the future. Even if you don't want to change your system, the universe changes out from under you, right? The cloud provider changes things. You're on Google Cloud and they deprecate some service. You get 0 days that get discovered, and now you got to change the system to react. The market changes around the business, right? There's technology shifts where you thought you did something a certain way, and now there's some new technology available to you and you would do it differently in the future. So you can't even know what's good today. You certainly don't know what's good tomorrow. And so instead of trying to worry about making the correct choices, try to make something that's useful, get something shipped. And I am sort of, in my current thinking, instead of, like, we always talk about, like, building something that's reusable, build something that's robust and reusable, that we can reuse this component all over the place. I try to think about building for disposability. How can we build something that's useful right now, and when it's outlived its usefulness, we can throw it away and replace it with something better? To the point of getting something out and making something useful, shipping is a feature, right? If you put something out, that's the other element of shipping, is when it actually gets in front of customers, they will change the design with how they react to it, how they use it. And you have all these grand plans, and then you find out that the real need that people have is something totally different and you totally didn't think of, and now you're off on a whole new direction. So prioritize shipping over coming up with the perfect design. So and with that said, I kind of started talking about microservices in general, and like, how do we take this customer, split it apart? Are microservices the right way, the again, to build software? And sure, there's a lot of benefits to microservices: scalability, flexibility. You can use different technologies in different places, fault isolation, maintenance, resource utilization, security. Those are all great. But for me, the last two here, faster development and deployment and better team organization, I think kind of take priority. Um, I think that's really the point of dividing up your system, is you're trying to um, be able to develop in a better way, right? So you want smaller, focused development teams. Like, here's your sphere of influence. You can focus on that. Clear data ownership. This piece of data belongs to who's responsible for making this sure this is correct and available. Reduce complexity for the team. More autonomy in development and decision making. So to me, like, this is the sweet spot of dividing things up, not some abstract, like, well, it's good to have multiple processes, but something, okay, how do I enable the teams to go faster? And that more autonomy and clear ownership is, I think, key to that. So, you want your teams to be able to go full speed. Well, okay, so do you have to have a distributed system? Do you have to have microservices? Well, I mean, think about it. If the goal is to go as fast as possible, well, what if you only have one developer? There's one developer making all the decisions. Maybe that developer also owns the company. It's a startup. That person can already go full speed. So do you have to divide things up? I would say not necessarily, and I wouldn't get too hung up about trying to do the right thing. I think kind of take your highest and best opinions and sort of drive forward, get something shipped, and try to find product market fit is the most important thing. And with one person, just kind of do the best you can, and you'll find out whether customers resonate with it. If they do, well, great. Now you have time to go and change things into how, they quote should be. Like, you learn things and you can change the code. If it doesn't resonate, well, you just throw the whole thing away anyway. So it's fine, right? So that's in the one person case, you already are enabled to go full speed. So choose whatever makes sense to you. Personally, if I'm working by myself, I still sort of have a um, kind of a virtual mapping of different services, even if it's in one process. I think some people call this like modular monolith, and I think that's a great approach to sort of breaking things up logically without breaking them up physically. So let's say you add another person. So now there's two people that you're working with. You end up with like one connection or communication path that you have to manage between you and that other person. I think it's interesting because sometimes two people can go faster than one, just because with one, at least for me, you gotta get stuck in analysis paralysis, and you're kind of you're overthinking things. And with a second person, hopefully they can balance you out and say, no, this is good enough, let's go. And you can kind of move a little bit faster. The other thing that happens with two people, you already sort of start to see like people have an affinity for certain parts of the system. And somebody takes over this area and somebody else takes over another area. And if something comes up, I'll take that one because it's sort of naturally in my area. I've seen this for over 20 years now, and I just think it's almost like a primitive form of service boundaries or bounded context that just emerges naturally between people, which I just find interesting. You go to three people, there's three communication paths. By the way, this whole communication paths is Fred Brooks's Mythical Man Month. I've got Claude to generate these SVGs for this, but that's where this idea comes from. And so, okay, with one, two, three people, the number of connections is pretty linear. And then you add four people, and now all of a sudden, okay, there's six connections between all these people. You know, you talk to the other three, but they talk to each other. And now you've got six ways that things need to be communicated. You go to five nodes and there's 10 connections. It's like, okay, well, you know, it's not sort of linear. It's sort of getting the number of connections is going up pretty fast at this point. Now, I'll stop here to say, like, I kind of think, you know, if you have one person who's highly opinionated, highly motivated, that probably can go the fastest. It may not be the best product, but they can ship. I tend to like 3 to 5 person teams. I think that's pretty good in terms of a balance between redundancy and being able to collaborate and get things done. But you know, as you get bigger, you get 12 people, and all of a sudden, just at 12, there's 66 communication pathways. Everybody starts to talk to everybody about all kinds of things. And it gets really hard to sort of have this mimetic transfer where ideas make it into everybody's head because there's so many different versions sort of floating around. Just as a side note, it kind of got interesting because I asked Claude to generate larger and larger of these nodes. And at some point, not too far after 12, I just kept getting blank blank screens. Like it couldn't draw all the connections, but it gets pretty crazy pretty quickly. If you say, instead of calling these people, you say they're teams, and now they're teams of people and they're all talking to each other. You know, let's just pretend in some perfect world it's just the PMs talk to each other. I think that's what the management dream would be, is that it's just the PMs talking to each other. But still, like, you just have all of these pathways that have to coordinate in order to make progress. And what happens when you have what I would call like the customer, the order, the product, is you have this like noun centric, entity centric worldview. But when you want to do something, you end up having to have each service talk to every other service. So you want to ship an order, and it's like, oh, well, the shipping address is with the customer, the product like size and weight is with the product. We got to call the order to figure out what's on the order. We got to do all this coordination just to get the stuff to ship. So the activity of shipping is sort of blocked behind all the services. And the more that goes on, you end up with a situation that kind of looks like this chart, where all the services call all the other services. And if any one of them is having a problem, nothing works. Well, if one thing has a problem and nothing works, then why did we take all this trouble to make everything distributed? There's no resiliency. There's no autonomy. It's just sort of a big ball of mud, as we say. There's just a big mess, right? So what's a better way to sort of approach if like this entity-centric view doesn't work that great? What's a better way that you could find to divide up your system? Well, I like this approach that I got from Udi Dahan's Advanced Distributed Systems Design course, of starting with activities and then sort of figuring out how they group together. So it's more of a bottom-up approach where you go like, okay, what's actually happening? What are we doing? And then seeing which one of those are kind of closer together. So I just have some sort of toy activities, like you place an order on the website, change the payment method, you subscribe to a newsletter, place an order by phone, you add a shipping address, and you add a billing address. You know, the billing address, shipping address, I like this example just because this is an example that every single one of us has experienced with real websites, where they ask you, you know, what's your shipping address, and then what's your billing address? Is it the same as the shipping address? So we've all seen this sort of split. And I think one idea, if you look at the activities, you might think, oh, we should have an address service. And this address services, it's tempting because, oh, we have multiple kinds of addresses. So you have an address service, and we'll say some of them are shipping addresses and some of them are billing addresses. And it feels kind of good that you're going to sort of centralize this. But then, as you start peeling things back or going deeper into the business, it starts to make less sense. So you have a shipping address and you have a home address and then a relative's address because you send them gifts. Okay. And then, like, all right, a billing address. And then at some point, you kind of realize, well, the billing address might be the same as your shipping address, but it might not. And why does it vary? Well, it varies because, oh, I need to pay for this with my business card, and my business card, the billing address is the office address. Oh, wait a minute. The billing address isn't tied to a customer. The billing address is tied to a payment method. So now you're in your address service and you start to think, all right, well, I need to say that this billing address is tied to this payment method. So I have a payment method column, but where is that data coming from? Do I have to bring payment methods into the address service? That feels weird. And then for the shipping addresses, they don't have payment methods, so it's null. So every consumer of this address service has to deal with this nullable column that is sometimes null if it's a shipping address, but we already have a thing that indicates a type that says it's a shipping address. So then now you have to also account for things like, oh, I got a billing address, but it had a null payment method. And it just gets real messy really quick. But if you start to, like, clump things together and you go like, well, okay, look, placing an order on the website is kind of similar to placing an order by phone. And changing a payment method is related to its billing address. And then you have the shipping address. Okay, these feel different. This newsletter one, man, I'm not quite sure yet what's happening there, but it's kind of marketing. Marketing leads to sales. I'm going to kick this one down the road. But you start to see, like, all right, from the bottom up, I've seen that these kind of things are similar. And now that I see that they're similar, I can sort of evaluate them and go, oh, I see, this is kind of a sales type domain, and this is sort of a billing context, and this is a fulfillment context. Like, all right, that makes some sense, but we've kind of approached it the other way around, from the bottom up instead of from the top down. I think when you start from, like, all right, I'm going to have sales, billing, fulfillment, and you start, like, trying to put stuff in it, one thing that happens is you start inventing things, just sort of making things up and sort of putting them in there versus addressing actual activities and actual customer needs. So these names, the key thing about them is that they're stable business capabilities. I think that's a great way to sort of organize, if you're going to split things apart, to organize them under these stable concepts. So they're core enduring functions that remain consistent and fundamental to an organization's value creation, regardless of changing market conditions or technological shifts, right? So, if you think about sales, billing, and shipping is sometimes used, but I like fulfillment, just because if you're not shipping products, you still have to fulfill. Every business ever has to have a way to sell. It has to have a way to collect money, and it has to have a way to fulfill on whatever it's promised its customers. So this is never going to go away. And when you have breaks like that, well, you can count on it not shifting out from under you. Maybe there are some concepts that for a particular industry are pretty stable, or maybe even for a business, this is like there's some unique value prop that's pretty stable. And those are all fine to use to find them. One sort of trap that I see people go to is, like, they sort of try to shape the software around the current org chart. And company org charts are just not stable. Like, they change for all sorts of reasons that have nothing to do with how the capabilities relate to each other or service customers. It's like CFO is in charge of something, and then there's a shakeup, and now it's moved to somebody else's office. So just don't even try to look at the org chart for inspiration on how to break up your system. So okay, we've sort of broken everything apart, but where is that customer? What happened to the customer? Well, the customer is still right there, right? All we're doing is we're saying, instead of saying there's a customer service, the customer has different aspects expressed in the different services. So in this example, I have customer ID 1234, and I'm sort of saying, oh, these are the sales aspects of this customer, the billing aspects of this customer, and the fulfillment aspects of this customer kind of broken apart into their constituent places, right? And the value of this is that each one of those places can sort of optimize as it wants to, as it needs to, um, without excessive coordination with the other groups. So, for instance, like if billing's kind of going along and they decide like, oh boy, we need to accept crypto, it's not something that you have to add to the customer service. You just add it to billing. Billing does its thing, collects money, and then tells the other groups like, okay, this order has been paid, and all the other groups can, so shipping can ship the product or whatever, fulfillment can proceed. One thing that I think often gets confused with microservices is the idea that a microservice or a service is a process, and it's not one-to-one with a process. So like it's a little tricky to think about because people say like, oh, well, the web app is a service, it's got to call all the other services. Well, the web app isn't a service, it's just a host. And each of the services sort of expresses itself in every process, right? So the service wants to own its data, own its capability, and express that everywhere in all the systems and all the aspects of the company, whether that's a web app or a mobile app, or even like on an invoice or a receipt. You see the services sort of expressing their part of the system to make that happen. And the reason you're doing this is because your customers don't care about your microservices. They don't care about your organizations. They want a cohesive picture of their interaction with your business. They could care less whether you have 99 services or not, right? They just want to have a receipt or an invoice or whatever and have all the information that they expect there. So we've split everything up. How do we sort of get everything back together? I wish this picture, if I had more time, I'd take this picture and just turn the arrows around, because really it's just kind of going back to where you were in a sense with a slightly different problem set, right? So we need to have a cohesive user experience. We want to bring all of the information that we've separated out, bring it back together. How do we do this? There's a bunch of techniques. Traditionally, in NServiceBus, you have a single, you have a process host, and you put DLLs from each of the services in there, and they sort of collaborate together. You agree on some interface, and this is where, we've spent time sort of being autonomous and going full speed. We can make changes for each service at its own pace, at its own discretion. But somewhere along the line, you have to kind of come to an agreement like, all right, we need to present this cohesive picture to the customer. Let's agree on something so that we can bring things together. But it's a very sort of lightweight thing. You're like, okay, here's the information that I need from you. Here's the information I need from you. How you actually produce it, no one really has an opinion. Each service can sort of optimize that to its heart's content. The great thing about it too is if there's a problem, if you say like, oh, hey, we're not ever, the billings isn't happening, or some piece of information isn't showing, exactly who's responsible for it. It's not a mystery. It's not like, oh, I don't know, is it the database team, is it the networking team, is it this team? you're sliced in a way where the responsibility is very clear and who owns it is very clear. So you can say, we'll have DLLs deployed together in a process. You could have multiple apps like the web app, mobile app, and have teams contributing PRs that bring their piece of the pie into the apps. You can do a UI composition and like some sort of client side composition to have each service grab its own data and then compose it onto the screen. Or you can do a composition in a database. So you could make sort of like a projection view model, database tables or what have you, where the idea would be like whatever screen you're presenting to the user is just going to simply query this table. It's designed for this experience. And now you've agreed on what fields, what keys are going to be there. And you just sort of put them where they go and style them, as the brand advisor wants. And so it's all displayed correctly. All the data is brought by the responsible service that's authoritative to it. So here's an example of doing exactly what I said, but like using Redis as a way to do the integration. This is a Redis hash object, or so in this example, I'm just saying like it's, instead of customer ID 1234, it's order ID 1234. So the key in Redis would be order view 1234, and sales is going to provide the first name and last name. Billing is going to provide the payment method, the identifier, the billing address, whatever. And then fulfillment's going to provide like a tracking number and a shipping address. And they all kind of put their pieces of the puzzle here. And then to display it, it's like, well, we've agreed what these names are. Now we can just sort of take those and put them on the screen and make everything presentable to the user. Now, like, let's say that there's some need to cache. Well, if it's a billing thing and we're going to cache the payment identifiers, well, billing knows all about whatever cache problems there are, like whether this is valid or not, and they can optimize that experience for the user in their context. It's not like, oh, the web team is trying to guess whether this is still valid data from the billing team. It's the billing team itself that can optimize that experience end to end. And that's the key to sort of breaking things apart, going full speed, but yet bringing it all back to having a cohesive experience for the user. And that's what I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kijana. We have a few questions we got prior to the webinar that I'd like to ask you.
Okay.
So the first one is, and you might have answered some of this already, so feel free to emphasize a specific thing. But the first one is, what is the correct context for the customer service? We've packed everything customer into one service, like authentication and other various services that deal with customers. So.
Yeah, I mean, so that's kind of what I was talking about with even those examples from from OpenAI. You end up with this situation where there really is no, when you kind of think about it from the perspective of, oh, we've got to have the customer service, there's really no end to that. It just can grow forever because everything is related to the customer. Like, oh, this is the customer's name. Yep. This is the customer's address. Yep. This is the customer's this and that. And it just grows indefinitely. And then it gets really nebulous about who owns what and what you can do with things. Like you have like a customer status and it says, they are whatever, deactivated. Like, what even does that mean? Can they log in and see previous orders? Does that mean they can't log in? Can they log in? Can they make new orders? Can they see? It just becomes very unclear. Whereas if you have things separated and it says like, you're in some sort of auth context and that they can't log in from this like auth status, that's very clear. Whereas when you sort of put everything in one big bucket, it just becomes very squirrely to try to figure out how to make decisions.
All right, that makes sense to me. How do you future-proof this approach for evolving technology and business requirements?
Yeah, future proofing is by nature tough because who knows what the future holds. But that was sort of if I can go back a little bit in the slide. So like imagine, I think by dividing things out where the services have autonomy and can kind of control their destiny, like um you're still gonna make mistakes. You're not gonna guess right all the time. So right here, I have payment method, payment identifier. Well, maybe we started with just credit cards, and instead of saying payment identifier, I said last four of the credit card. Well, we wake up one day and we're like, oh, we want to accept crypto. And it's like, oh crap, last four of the credit card doesn't make sense as a key anymore. Like, okay, well, first of all, in order to accept crypto, like there's a bunch of work and we can kind of do all that work as billing, figure out how to accept it and say, okay, great. And second of all, we can kind of say, we know where all the integration points are. We know where billing is expressing itself all over the place. So we need to audit through all of those integrations and say, hey, we used to say last four of the credit card, we're going to add this new key, and then here, like how you actually do this is up for every organization, but here's a PR where we stop using last four of the credit card and we start using payment identifier. We've been filling out both for a while, but for people that use crypto, it would be a little weird because it'll say when it says last four of the credit card, but we have all the flex points in place. So really, it's not future proofing it from the idea that no matter what happens, we already have accounted for it, but that we can account for it and we have a way to evolve into the future.
Okay, and this next question piggybacks on that one a little bit. What are the most common mistakes organizations make when adopting this kind of model?
Yeah, I think the first common mistake is sort of the noun or entity centric modeling, customer, order, product. I think that's the first mistake, which we've talked about a lot today. I'd say that another big mistake is sort of using a bus or a queue or topic as a data transport, where you end up shipping the data all around, like, oh, they updated their name, we need to publish that and then have everybody subscribe to that. And I think the problem with that is ownership becomes unclear. You end up with a situation of what's the source of truth for this information. Well, if there's a service that's providing this information everywhere, it's very clear who's responsible. But if you just sort of publish it for everybody else in the enterprise to consume, you're left in this cache and validation problem, which is one of the three hard computer science problems. So you just put yourself in a worse situation.
All right, I think that's all the questions that we have. Thank you, Kijana, for joining us and presenting the topic today. We do have a few very short announcements. Would you like to learn more about the techniques described in this webinar and other challenges related to building distributed systems? Udi Dahan's Advanced Distributed Systems Design course will take place on March 3rd through the 7th in Atlanta, Georgia. Early pricing is still available until December 8th. Please visit particular.net/ADSD for all the details. Also, our colleagues will be speaking next Thursday at Cloud Brew in Belgium and at NDC London next month. Go to particular.net/events to find us at a conference near you. That's all we have time for today. On behalf of Kijana Woodard, this is Adam Wright saying goodbye for now and see you on the next particular live webinar. Thank you.